Okay, I think we can start. Hello and welcome to the special edition of On Topic. This is the Bloomberg Opinion Show in which we unpack major news of the moment. We're taking a slightly different tack this time. We're talking about what is major news for some of us who are crazy about cricket and are in America. I wrote a column about this in Bloomberg Opinion about Major League Cricket, a new tournament that starts on Friday in Dallas, Texas. And it would be awkward for me to be conducting this interview. So I'm delighted to pass the mic and the baton to my colleague, Candice Zachariahs. Candice, take it away.
Hi, Bobby. Hi, everyone. Let me also so I'm Candice Zachariahs. I am an editor with Bloomberg Opinion. And we have with us also John Authers, who is a columnist. And I think what joins us all is we are either current or one-time cricket fans from cricket-loving nations who find ourselves in the US. And I have to say, I was surprised when I read Bobby's column because America is definitely a cricket-mad country, but a sports-mad country. But cricket, I don't know. Most people would be puzzled, definitely not know the rules of the game. So, Bobby, you spoke with a lot of people who are backing Major League Cricket in the US and the 6 teams that will be in the inaugural championship tournament that's kicking off on Friday. After having talked to them, after having written the column, what do you think? What are their chances of success here?
I think their chances of success are good, but they're being very careful to define success in a very narrow way, and I think that's smart. They seem to recognize, as you just mentioned, that the majority of Americans know nothing about cricket and frankly are unlikely to immediately jump into this sport. That may take years, generations. In fact, that it's possible that never happens. But, and here's the but, there's a big enough community of people from cricket-loving countries, like the three of us, in this country. And the size of that diaspora is now substantial and big enough to sustain the lead. So it may only be a niche sport, but it can succeed financially as a business as a niche sport in this country. Let me throw some numbers at you. If you can count the diasporas of all the cricket-loving nations, so Britain, like John, India, like you and I, Australia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and the Caribbean countries, we're talking about more than 10 million, possibly as many as 20 million people. That's a nice chunk of people. A population of a lot of cricket-playing countries. And if you narrow down to just the Indian immigrants, that's less than 3 million, about 2.7 million. But it may be the wealthiest immigrant community in this country. So that combination of and numbers of people with money to spend and a passion for cricket enough to sustain Major League Cricket.
Okay, so let's talk to one of the diaspora. John, you came here in the 90s, is it?
Yeah.
You've adopted baseball as your favorite sport, and I think a lot of people who move to the US find themselves sucked into whether it's baseball or basketball or American football, you name it, right? What do you think, as someone who's continued to follow Test cricket, if not T20, would you follow the MLC games?
I'll take a look. I mean, there is the slightly important fact that there's an Ashes series going on just at the moment for the uninitiated. England play Australia in Test cricket over 5 days for the right to earn. To hold a very small urn which holds the ashes of English cricket, and it means a lot if you're an English person or an Aussie. So I doubt I'm going to be able to turn my enthusiasm totally towards Major League Cricket. That said, 2020 cricket, that's the version they're playing, which is basically no longer than a baseball game. In fact, until this year when they changed the rules of baseball to speed it up a bit, it was actually quite a bit quicker than the average baseball game. It is a lot of fun. You can really enjoy yourself watching 2020. It is easier for people to grab onto, and I do have the experience. Why I tend to think also that this could work. I once happened to be in Dubai on work and discovered that the Pakistani Super League, which is a very similar entity to Major League Cricket, or proud to be, was playing all its games in the United Arab Emirates because safety was a problem in Pakistan. So I had a very pleasant after visit going and watching various teams representing people like Peshawar and Karachi and Lahore, with a number of very famous cricketers. Like, again, if you're a cricket lover, I got to see Kevin Peterson playing. Viv Richards was managing one of the teams. Mm-hmm. It was fun, and it was a purely diasporic crowd. I'm not sure there were any actual Emiratis there. There were a few Aussies and English people like me, and there were lots and lots of South Asians. It was, and people were really into it. Mm-hmm. That, I think, is quite a good parallel for what could happen to cricket here, that it becomes an interesting niche sport. And I guess the other thing, which Bobby said, we are Bloomberg, we do talk about money. It has the advantage compared to soccer. Soccer has also grown very slowly but very steadily, more or less from when I first came to this country in the mid-90s after the 94 World Cup. And they've played it very carefully, they've grown very patiently, but that was basically thanks to the Latino diaspora. There are lots of people in this country who hail from countries where soccer is close to a religion, mm-hmm. and that was how the sport built here. Big advantage being obviously that the diaspora that cricket is appealing to might actually have some more money to spend on tickets than the, mm-hmm. the diaspora that help soccer get going.
You make a good point. I mean, the atmosphere is electric, right, at T20 and cricket matches. But Bobby, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to add to what John said, which is that another big part of the MLC's calculation is the international audience. So they're hoping that they can get people in India and in Britain and in South Africa who watch the games that are being played on television. So if they can get a television audience and the commercial possibilities that come with that, cricket is the world's second most popular sport after soccer. In India alone, the size of the market, it boggles the mind. It may be 1 billion people. If they can get a piece of that action, if they can get a television audience, enough to sustain the lead.
Yeah, I mean, talking about the business end, I was just reading an article that was in one of the local papers in India, putting the IPL valuation at something like $15 billion. Like, it feels mind-boggling, but it speaks to how cricket mad India and Indians are, and how well the IPL has done since, I think, when did it launch? 2008. So it hasn't been a very long time, but it has a massive following. And then it has super fans who kind of, I think, really, raise the volume on social media as well when it comes to IPL games. But now, increasingly, also the MLC. You're seeing them try and draw in the local fans via their Insta pages or their TikTok profiles. And so I want to ask you a little bit about what I think is a bit of a sort of elephant in the room, is that there are no big name Indian stars in the MLC. Why is that to begin with? And, how much of a problem is it to get the Indian audience engaged?
Well, this is year one, and I asked the organizers the same question, and they said that, year one is sort of experimental, and they hope in year two and going forward that situation will change. The reason why there are no current Indian players playing at the MLC is that the Indian Cricket Board, which controls, would not permission to play in any tournament. The Indian Cricket Board itself is not directly involved. And that situation could change, or it may not. But again, it may not matter for reasons. One is that, players that are just beyond the point where they can continue to play for India have sort of hung up their gloves in the Indian Cricket League, might be able to play in the US. And besides that, what MLC has done is that it has tied up with IPL, the Indian Premier League. Several of the are co-owned by the Indian teams in the Indian league, and they can count on their fans to follow what's going on in MLC, regardless of whether there are Indian players there. So it's a bit like, if I can think of a parallel, of Premier League soccer in the UK. It's not uncommon for big teams, Arsenal, Manchester United, Manchester City, to put out teams that have no English players, or maybe one or two English players. But fans still follow those teams and the fortunes of those teams. What MLC is hoping that if you're a fan of Mumbai Indians, which is a team in the IPL, or Chennai Super Kings, then you will also transfer some of that loyalty to New York Mumbai Indians, which is here, or Dallas Super Kings, which is also one of the franchises. Will that happen? Will the fans who are loyal to the clubs transfer, or at least bring some of their enthusiasm and their interest into the MLC? That's going to be the $1 million size of the investment that's going into the first.
And just to give you an analogy from Major League Soccer, one of the few things that hasn't worked for them was Chivas, which is FC Guadalajara, the biggest soccer club in Mexico, started up in Los Angeles a franchise called Chivas USA, and Los Angeles is where most of the people from Jalisco, where Guadalajara are based, settled, and it didn't actually work out. You know, they wore the same uniforms and all the rest of it, and it didn't work out. So it's a difficult piece of marketing to pull off. Similarly, New York City, who have won the Major League Soccer, wear exactly the same uniforms as their parent club, Manchester City. I'm not aware of too many City fans getting terribly excited by them. That said, the other thing I think, which is critical here, could well be, you're right, in the long run, the quality of the people that are involved. So, to give one example of the reach of the IPL, the Indian Premier League, now that it's got so big, it's got so much money, and it's able to get many people in. You know, my father back in England is, while the IPL is on, he is forever talking to me about, you see what the Kolkata Knight Riders did last night? And, no, I didn't, Dad. But, you know, it's a really compelling product that that people in England, with only a very few English players in there, but people in England will thoroughly enjoy watching, and presumably elsewhere in the cricket world. So the model is definitely workable, but you do need to make sure it's a really good product to get people to get excited.
This is true. I mean, I did an informal survey among my friends, one of whom is Amit, if you're listening, Mumbai Indians super fan, and he's already following the New York New York on Insta, and he's like, I'll watch the games, I'll come for the matches when I'm there. So I think you're right, John. As long as they're able to produce quality cricket, and people can be as proud of the US teams as they are of their local teams, and feel some of that competitiveness and camaraderie that really, that's really kind of shines with cricket. You all go to the fields, you cheer together. There's an incredible sort of magnetic atmosphere. If they can replicate some of those things, I think they have a good shot. There was one thing that when we were talking earlier, I found interesting, and that was the history of cricket in the US. I didn't realize it had such a long history, but do one of you want to kind of just go into that a little bit?
Go ahead, Bobby.
Cricket was the most popular sport in this country during the War of Independence back then, which makes sense.
Going back a little way there.
We're going back a little way. There are stories that that George Washington played cricket with some of his soldiers during the long cold winters, while he next move against the English or the British. So cricket was played by in India and many other countries where the British were the colonial masters. It was played in this country. The first international cricket, two countries, played in, I think, in the 1820s between the United States and Canada. Canada won. This was long before England was playing Australia, long before the Ashes. Of course, America took cricket, if you like, and reinvented it, just as America tends to do, reinvents things. Baseball came out of that. American football came, some version of rugby. And then basketball was essentially created here. Sports, American sports sort of basically then over everything else, and cricket sort of fell by the wayside. I believe there is the world's biggest cricket museum is in Philadelphia, and so there is a long history, but that may be too far behind in the mists of time have any bearing on MLC's chance of success. But I can see them making some marketing hay out of it. They could as a way to intrigue Americans and who are not familiar with it, they can sort of invoke America's ancient ties with cricket to try and see if they can get people interested in the sport now.
And one point just to add to that, baseball did get a start in England. So, similar to the English game called Rounders, which is generally played at school. And one indication of that, Derby County, which is one of the founding clubs of the Football League, played for the first 100 years or so of their history at a stadium called the Baseball Ground. Mm-hmm. They started playing at the ground of the local baseball team, and obviously baseball didn't make it, and soccer very much did in England. But there are roots for a lot of sports are less nationally specific than people assume that they are.
Are there similarities, John, between baseball and cricket still that'll help people understand the game more quickly?
Whenever I try to write about cricket for a largely American audience, I try to translate it into baseball terms, and most of it is translatable. My experience from talking to Americans who find it incredible, the thing they can't get past, and I do understand this, is there's a test match, an international match lasts 5 days, and people stop for lunch and tea. And should technically last 30 hours. How can anybody possibly sit down and watch this? And I have actually, not very often, but there have been a couple of times when I have sat down and watched every single ball of a test match. And it was great. I think two things. One is, I think, if you look at baseball, the unit of baseball is the series. A World Series is actually 7 games, and you have a lot of the same strategy in an international test match comes up over the course of a series. Do I use my pitcher now, and then he won't be available tomorrow? In the same way, do I bring on my fast bowler for one burst now? What do I do if I don't take a wicket? The similarities are quite close there. But the other thing is that this is 2020 cricket that is being played. In baseball terms, each side makes 120 pitches, and that's it. And your average baseball game has somewhat more than 240 pitches thrown during the course of a game. So I think it's similar enough to baseball and athletic enough, exciting enough to watch in this format. I think it does have a chance. I think I do understand this, much though I love watching Test cricket. The idea of asking somebody to go along to a game that will last for 5 days and might easily end in a draw. I understand why Americans find that a hard sell. That doesn't apply to 2020.
I think the popularity of T20 speaks to, or the 2020 format of the game that we're talking about now, it speaks to the fact that cricket lovers everywhere have kind of decided they need a shorter format, more exciting version of the game. This time next year, we'll be talking about the T20 World Cup. Is that right, Bobby? Which is played, yes, surprisingly, going to be played in the US as well.
Some of the games will be played here. Mostly it'll be in the Caribbean. And a few games will be played in the US. And the organizers of Major League Cricket are hoping that also sort of draws attention to their tournament, and perhaps sort of plants the seed of cricket in the minds of some Americans. Whether or not that happens, it will keep cricket in the conversation. Uh, then MLC can become part of that conversation in this country, and that's what they're counting on.
Right. Right. I was a bit surprised, I have to say, that they're starting their first season in Dallas. I would have thought, the greater New York area, Silicon Valley, these are places with high concentrations of expats, particularly South Asians. Why did they pick Dallas, and what are their plans as they go forward?
Well, Dallas has a very large South Asian, or sort of, South Asian community. It's the fourth or fifth largest cluster of South Asians. The Dallas, North Texas area has dozens and teams. There are three different amateur leagues that take place there, and so there is a critical mass of people who know and love cricket in that area. But the reason they're doing this in Dallas is very straightforward. There was a cricket pitch, a cricket stadium that happened to be ready for this tournament. Some games are also going to be played in Raleigh, North Carolina, for same ready. Over the next couple of years, all the 6 teams are meant to buy and create their own cricket pitches. And so future tournaments will rotate. I mean, games will be played all over in a way that's much more familiar to sports fans everywhere. Dallas just had the head start because there was a fully fledged. They took an old American football stadium, I think it was a minor league stadium, and turned it. A cricket stadium is a very specific thing. It's a specific size. There is a pitch in the middle of the stadium that requires sort of specialist sort of construction. You can't simply play a cricket game, unlike soccer, which in the early days was played in American football grounds. You can't do that with pitch alone. Makes it a very specific thing. And Dallas happened to go first.
And the first game is sold out, I hear.
The first game is sold out on Friday. Lots of excitement around that, and they're expecting sizable crowds for all the games. The crucial question, though, is the television audience. So Willow TV, which is familiar to cricket fans in this country and cricket fans outside of the big cricket playing country. Willow TV has the rights for the first season, and see how many people sign up to watch on Willow. The organizers are despite their enthusiasm and excitement, they're trying to be realistic. They're saying to me that, look, this will take several years before we see any money coming, and this is a long. And that's the way I think. Most of the team owners are of Indian origin. Some big names there. Satya Nadella, of the CEO of Microsoft, is the co-owner of the Seattle team. Most of the Indian owners are also, this should come as no surprise, from the tech industry, and many of them used that tech language when they were speaking to me. They were talking about this is a startup, and startups take time, and we're not going to get our returns right away, but we're familiar with what it takes to make a startup a success, and we're willing to make that commitment to this tournament.
I think that Satya Nadella is probably as big a draw for the Indian techie community here as maybe a Dhoni or someone like that.
Or a Shah Rukh Khan even. He's a superstar in his own right.
Absolutely. But are we going to see Shah Rukh Khan, who is one of the owners of the IPL teams? Just for those who
they're
don't
being
know.
very coy about that. I've asked a few times and to a few different people, and they're being very coy about whether the big Bollywood names who are associated with will also make an appearance at the MLC. I'm not entirely sure, but I think that would be desirable from the point of view of the organizers. I think they haven't yet gotten the commitment. It's not easy to get.
Or getting some of the big cricket names as well, right? I was sort of intrigued. I've been reading in the papers in India about the BCCI, which is the Cricket Board of India. Similarly, actually, John, in the UK as well. Not a lot of Indian and British players represented in the MLC right now. Despite how niche this is and the sort of startup-y nature of the whole thing, it seems to have gotten some of the local boards a little bit nervous. Why is that?
I suppose you again, there's an analogy here, I think, with soccer that a lot of other countries are nervous about America getting good because people enjoy watching the Soccer World Cup because it's one of those things that the Americans really don't dominate, and there is this fear that given the economic muscle of the US, that if they really catches on here, they will be that much greater. I think in the case of anybody other than the IPL, their 2020 leagues, there are, I don't know, 7 or 8 2020 leagues around the world by this point. All of them, other than the IPL, still have some degree of a problem really establishing themselves as being a worthwhile league to follow. And I guess in the case of the British in particular, this is happening during the English domestic season. I'm not sure any of the other cricketing nations tend to be playing cricket in July. So in the case of England, the English players, it's a little bit more threatening to their own local, to the local leagues that they have in England. And the other thing which I think is mad, that we now have, not only do we have the T20 competition in England, but we also have a new thing called the 100, which is 100 balls, which is 20 balls less than 2020, and there are 2 separate tournaments with different franchises. Given that English cricket administrators are trying to build up their own home game as much as that in ways that I don't think are terribly well advised, I can see why they'd be nervous about products starting in America as well.
Bobby, what about the
T10? There's another format called T10 with 10 overs apiece, which is even shorter. The cricket authorities are very keen for cricket to become part of the Olympic sort of set of sports, and T10 or T20 may be the way to go there. You want a short format. There is going to be intense competition. Cricket boards tend to be a little resistant to change historically. They did not welcome the shorter versions of the game when they first arrived. There was a tendency to hold to tradition and look down their noses at the new formats as being. I remember when short form cricket first arrived, the British authorities dismissed it as pajama cricket because players were playing in colourful kit rather than just white. So there is a tendency to resistance, but if the officers of LC are as good as their word, if they are committed to backing this for several years, then I think that they can overcome that resistance.
I think there's some. Sorry, go ahead, John.
That's one of my favourite anecdote. Before we came on air, we were discussing Sunil Gavaskar, one of the very greatest Indian batsmen. As a kid, I can remember the inaugural one-day World Cup, which was 60 overs rather than 20, being played in England, and Gavaskar just refused to adapt the way he played at all to the fact that he was being limited. So he just went out and scored a century and took something like 60 overs over doing it. Didn't seem to mind that India were losing.
Oh no, it was worse than that, John. He only scored 32.
Right.
To do it. That was not a good advertisement of the game.
So we might see some. I guess we have seen new stars created by T20 in general, right? The stars who are more explosive, I suppose, and that's really the format that this is. It's an explosive format. We're coming up to time. I want to give it back to you, Bobby, since this is your column that we're talking about here. Any last words?
Well, I'd say that T20 is the sort of, when T20 was first launched elsewhere in the world, it was seen as the Americanization of cricket. It was cricket with the hoopla of American sports, complete with cheerleaders. I mean, Indian teams got cheerleaders from American sports to go over and train Indian cheerleaders. So there is a sense of cricket, sort of T20 cricket coming home, ironically enough. The American form of cricket was birthed and evolved elsewhere and is now coming back to America, the land of, if you like, conception, or some of the conception around it. So it comes pre-loaded for an American audience. It has a sizable following within the country, particularly among the diasporas. The big question is that combination enough to make it a success? As a cricket fan, My fingers crossed.
Well, I'll certainly be watching. And to John's point earlier, I hope it's high quality cricket and we can all reconnect with our roots in a way, reconnect with our families back home, talking about Major League Cricket in the US. So thank you both. And we will chat again soon.